All right, everyone, welcome back. Ready for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be tackling something called regression testing.
Ooh, yeah,
Yeah.
regression testing.
It may not sound as immediately captivating as some of our other topics,
Right.
but I think once we get into it, it's actually pretty fascinating. It's all about how software, how do you keep it reliable,
Yeah,
even when it's constantly being updated and changed all the time?
exactly. And I think a good way to think about it is, every time a developer, every time anybody changes a piece of code, even a little piece, it's like dropping a pebble into a pond
Okay.
and it creates these ripples. And so regression testing is all about making sure that those ripples don't, cause unexpected problems elsewhere in the software.
It's like you don't want the little ripples to become like a tsunami.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So to help us navigate these waters, we've got some great sources this time around, and we're going to be going way beyond just basic definitions.
Yeah.
We're going to really uncover why this matters so much, how it's actually done, and we'll even get a peek at some of the tools the pros are using.
So, what's really interesting to me about this is it's not just about like hunting down those obvious bugs.
Right.
It's about ensuring the overall quality, the integrity of the entire piece of software.
It's got to hold together.
It's got to hold together. Yeah. Think about it. Have you ever downloaded an update for an app? You're expecting some cool new features, and then all of a sudden the basic stuff you use all the time is just broken.
Oh, yeah.
That's what we're trying to prevent here.
Yeah. And our sources, they lay out some pretty clear scenarios where this testing is absolutely crucial. So imagine, a team adds a slick new social sharing feature to an app. Sounds great. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
But what if that change somehow messes up the core messaging functionality?
Hmm.
Or a developer fixes a bug in an online store's checkout,
Right.
but now nobody can log in.
Exactly. Those are the unintended consequences that you just don't think about, and that's what regression testing is for.
Exactly. It's like, yeah, you fix one thing, but then...
5 other things break.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah.
So let's get into the how do they actually do this?
Yeah.
Our sources mention a technique called retest all. Pretty straightforward name.
Yeah.
Basically, you test every single feature, even if the change you made seems really tiny.
Right.
It's thorough, for sure, but I can see how that could be a little bit overkill for a big, complicated piece of software.
It can be. It's like, if you change one light bulb in your house, you don't have to go check every single light bulb
Right, yeah.
to make sure it still works. So that's why we have things like regression test selection.
Right.
And that's where you strategically choose which tests to run based on, where you think those ripples might go. What did you change and what could be affected?
So it's all about prioritizing, basically.
Prioritizing, exactly.
Yep. Yeah. And, actually, one of our sources had a kind of shocking statistic about this.
Oh, really?
Apparently, a huge percentage of customer-reported issues
Wow.
are actually side effects from those last-minute bug fixes.
That's crazy.
So this is really highlighting how vital this, strategic approach to testing is. We're not just doing it for fun.
Absolutely. No, and there are some really good frameworks out there. One of our sources talked about, how you should choose what to test. And one of the first things is focusing on areas that are just historically prone to bugs. Like if you've got that one creaky step in your house,
Yeah.
you always know. Okay.
You got to be careful on that step.
Exactly.
Yeah, and then you got to think about, the user impact too. You're going to want to prioritize taping the features that people are, using all the time.
Yeah.
So if something breaks that's really core to the functionality of the app, that's a much bigger deal than a small visual glitch.
For sure. Yeah. And of course, you can't forget about the recent changes themselves. That's where you really got to scrutinize, what did you change and what could be affected.
Right.
But also, it's not just about testing when things go right. It's about testing what happens when a user does something.
Unexpected.
Yeah, unexpected. Will it handle it gracefully or will it just crash?
Right. Because people do weird stuff.
All the time, yeah.
All the time, yeah. So now imagine, a company like Amazon. They are constantly adding new products, new features, constantly updating,
Right.
testing everything manually, logistical nightmare.
Oh, yeah.
That's where the world of automated regression testing comes in.
Right, right.
So things like,
Like Test Rigor, Subject 7, Selenium.
yeah, all these tools out there.
They really help you, automate those repetitive tasks. And they can run way more tests, way more frequently than any human possibly could.
But even with all that automation, our sources really emphasize it's not like a set it and forget it
Right.
kind of thing.
You can't just, turn it on and let it go.
No, it takes planning, it takes skilled engineers, And it actually takes a lot of collaboration between those who test manually
Yeah.
and those who work on the automation.
That's right, because the automation helps streamline the process, but human expertise is still crucial. You got to design the right tests, you got to know how to interpret the results, and somebody's got to make those judgment calls
Right, right.
about whether the software is actually good enough.
So we've talked about the why, we've talked about the when. Now let's get into the different types of regression testing, because as we've learned, it's not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Oh, yeah, absolutely not, yeah.
So one of our sources used the example of a bug fix in a login system
Okay.
to illustrate something called unit regression testing.
So that's where you're really laser focused on a very specific part of the code.
Okay.
You just want to make sure that the fix worked and that it didn't create any new problems in that one little area.
Okay, so very specific, very targeted,
Yeah.
very targeted. But sometimes changes can have a wider impact, right?
Right.
That's where you get regional regression testing.
Okay.
And think of it like this. Okay, so imagine you're a plumber and you just replaced the section of pipe in a house. You're not going to just check that one section for leaks, are you? You got to make sure that you didn't accidentally cause problems in other connected areas.
Right, yeah, like you don't want to flood the basement.
Exactly. And that's basically the idea behind regional regression testing. You're checking the impact region.
Okay, so we've got this very specific targeted unit testing. Then we've got this broader regional testing. But then there's also full regression testing. That's the big one.
Yeah, that's the one where you're really making sure that everything is in order.
So when would you do that?
Well, you usually save that for later stages of development, like right before a big release.
Makes sense.
It's the most comprehensive type of testing, but it's also the most resource intensive. So, you don't want to do it all the time, but you got to do it before you launch, It's like the final system check before you launch the rocket.
Exactly.
So like you were saying earlier, in a fast-paced environment, doing all this testing manually,
Forget it.
it would just be impossible, right? So our sources really emphasize that automation is key here. But it's not just about running a bunch of automated scripts.
Right. One of our sources talked about this, and I thought it was really interesting. It's you really need clear communication between the manual testers who really deeply understand the software and then the automation engineers who actually build the tools.
Mm-hmm.
You got to have them talking.
Right, because the manual testers are the ones who can say, okay, this is a historically buggy area, or I think if we change this, it might have this unexpected consequence over here.
Exactly. And then they can say, okay, automation engineers, can you build a test that really checks for this specific thing?
So it's all about working together.
Absolutely. It's a collaboration.
So it sounds like automated regression testing, even though it's amazing. And it's necessary. It's not a cure-all.
Oh, absolutely not.
What are some of the challenges that you run into?
Well, one of the biggest ones is just the initial investment, Building a robust automated testing system. That takes time. It takes resources. It takes people who know what they're doing. So I can see that being a real challenge for some teams, especially smaller companies.
Right. Yeah. Definitely a barrier to entry there.
Yeah.
But it sounds like the long-term benefits probably outweigh those initial costs.
Right. Because if you think about it, manual testing, that's so slow. It's prone to human error.
Yeah.
Automation, it just makes everything so much faster and so much more accurate. And it frees up those human testers to really focus on those really tricky, complex problems.
Right. It's like they can do the thinking work.
Right. The strategic stuff
Yeah.
that computers aren't good at.
And, our sources highlighted another big benefit, which is reusability.
Oh, yeah. Here.
Once you've built an automated test for a feature,
Yeah.
you can just reuse it over and over and over again
Yeah.
across different versions of the software and even, different projects potentially.
Right. Especially these days when software is constantly being updated and iterated on. It's you build the test once and then you're good to go.
Yeah, that's awesome.
But
even with all these amazing advantages, there are some pitfalls to watch out for.
Oh, yeah.
So one that our sources mentioned is, what they call brittle tests.
Okay.
So these are tests that break easily when the software changes,
Right.
even if the core functionality is still fine.
Right.
So I'm imagining that can lead to a lot of false alarms.
Oh, yeah. You get all these failed tests and then you have to go in and look at them and oh, it's not actually broken. It's just that the test
Is outdated or something?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really important to design tests that are resilient to change.
So how do you do that?
Well, one way is to focus on testing the underlying functionality, rather than just the specific UI elements, because those tend to change all the time.
Right. It's you don't want to test like the color of a button.
Exactly. You want to test that when you click the button, it actually does the thing it's supposed to do.
Right, like it's connected to the engine.
Exactly.
And the engine is working.
That's a great analogy.
So then that brings us to another important point, which is how do you maintain all these automated tests?
Yeah.
Because as the software evolves, the tests got to evolve too.
Yeah. Or else you end up with all these tests that are just, outdated. And they're not really testing the right things anymore.
So it seems like that could become a real burden, especially as the software gets more and more complex.
It definitely can. But there are ways to manage that complexity. One is to prioritize, figure out which features are the most important, the riskiest, and focus on testing those more often.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
One of our sources talked about the importance of, ownership.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like making sure that somebody is responsible for keeping those tests up to date.
Somebody's got to own it.
Yeah. Yeah, because if nobody's in charge, it's easy to just,
let them get stale.
Yeah, exactly.
And then you end up with gaps in your testing. And that's when the bugs can sneak in.
So, one thing that's been really striking to me as we've been talking about all this is that, regression testing, it often happens kind of behind the scenes.
Right.
But it's really all about building trust.
Yeah, building trust with your users.
With your users.
Absolutely.
Because when software works reliably, it really builds trust in the company or the developers who made it.
You're right. It's like when a company always delivers high-quality products or services, you trust them because they've proven themselves over time.
Yeah, it's like, I've never had a problem with this.
Oh, right.
I know it's going to work.
Right.
So I trust them.
Yeah, and on the flip side, when software is all buggy and unreliable, it really damages that trust and it can be hard to get it back.
It's like, once you get burned,
yeah,
it's kind of, I don't know.
Exactly. You're going to be wary the next time.
So it's almost like regression testing is like this insurance policy.
Yeah.
Protecting not just the software itself,
right,
but also the reputation of the people who bent it.
You nailed it. That's a great way to think about it.
So it's not just a box to check.
No, it's really a strategic process.
Yeah, and it's about thinking about the user.
Yeah, it's all about the user experience.
And how do we make sure that they're having a good time?
Exactly.
Yeah, it really is. It's this constant balance, isn't it?
It is.
Like, on one hand, you want to, keep innovating. You want to add all the cool new features.
Right. Push the boundaries.
Yeah, push the boundaries.
But you got to keep it working.
But then you got to make sure it actually works.
Right, yeah.
And it's reliable and people can actually use it. So, I think one thing that I kind of keep coming back to as we've been talking about this is this difference between retesting and regression testing.
Oh, okay.
It's subtle, but I think it's actually really important.
It is, yeah. A lot of people get those confused.
Yeah.
I think a good way to think about it is retesting is like checking a specific ingredient in a recipe. You just want to make sure that one thing is good.
Okay.
Regression testing is like tasting the whole dish.
Oh, okay.
After you've changed the recipe to make sure that it all still works together.
I like that. I like that analogy.
Yeah.
So retesting is very focused and targeted.
Exactly. Yeah.
Regression testing is much
broad. More holistic. Yeah. So retesting usually happens when you fix a specific bug. You're just verifying that one thing got fixed and that you didn't break anything else.
So going back to our Amazon example.
Yeah.
If they, discovered a bug in the search function after they added the smart home category.
Right.
They would retest that search functionality.
Specifically.
Just to make sure it was working.
Exactly. But regression testing would go beyond that.
Okay.
It would be about, okay, did adding that new category somehow break other parts of the website?
Even though they seem totally unrelated.
Right. Even though you wouldn't think they would be connected.
Like you fix the leaky faucet in your bathroom.
Right.
And suddenly your kitchen sink is like spewing water.
Exactly.
So this is where it sounds like that, strategic test case selection is super important.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Because you can't retest everything every time you make a little change.
Right. You got to prioritize.
Yeah.
And this is where it really helps to have those manual testers, the ones with the expertise, working closely with the automation engineers.
Right. Because the manual testers can say, okay, I think this is an area we really need to look at.
Exactly.
Because I think this might have been impacted by the change.
Yep. Yeah.
Even though it doesn't seem obvious.
And then the automation engineers can dig a test that really digs deep.
Yeah.
And make sure everything's still working.
So it's really, it's this combination of the human knowledge and the technology.
Yeah. Got to have both.
That makes this whole thing work. It's not just, ones and zeros.
No, it's about understanding how people actually use the software,
Right.
you got to make sure that that experience is still good.
Even as the software's like
Hmm.
changing underneath.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
I think that's a great point, and I think it's a really good takeaway for our listeners is that, regression testing, it might not be the most like glamorous part of software development.
It's not the flashy stuff.
Yeah, but it's so important.
It's the foundation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's what makes those seamless digital experiences possible.
So next time you like update an app on your phone or you're browsing a website and everything's working perfectly,
Yeah.
just take a minute and appreciate those testers.
Yeah, they're the unsung heroes.
Yeah.
They're working behind the scenes to keep everything running smoothly.
Yeah, they're like the stage crew of the internet.
Exactly, exactly.
And even if you do run into a bug,
yeah,
don't freak out.
it happens.
It happens. There's a whole team of people
Yeah, there are.
who are going to, track it down, fix it, and get things back to normal.
Exactly, so you can get back to doing whatever you were doing.
All right. Well, until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those minds curious.